Yo, what's up everybody? Welcome back to yet another video regarding my freshman year of college. I'm going to be ranking my freshman year engineering classes in terms of difficulty and enjoyment. If you enjoy the video, I highly recommend subscribing. And if during the video you have any further questions on the classes that I mentioned, go ahead and comment it down below and I'll do my very best to answer what questions you have. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into ranking my freshman year engineering classes. As I said, in terms of ranking, I will be looking into two categories. One being the difficulty of the class, and two is going to be the level of enjoyment I had during the class. I will do my very best not to cross the two categories, as you may assume the level of enjoyment of the class is going to drop if the rigor of the class is much higher. So I'll do my very best to separate the two. And as you can see now, I'm going to be using one of those cliche S tier, A tier letter things to rank them, because as I've seen before, it works pretty well. And I think everyone has a pretty good understanding of what each letter refers to. But to start off with the ranking of my 4 freshman engineering classes, I'm going to be first taking a look at Introduction to Circuits, most commonly known as 302. If you are attending UT and you're taking electrical engineering and you talk to upperclassmen about 302, you will most likely be told that it is a weed out class. And while in recent history it definitely was considered a weed out class, this previous year when I took the class, you could tell the professors were really trying to push away the narrative that it was for weeding out a bunch of freshmen. They slowly started experimenting with a new curriculum that, in my opinion, is more beneficial to the actual students of the major. You see, instead of going way more in depth in these complex circuit diagrams and how you could simplify them or solve them, they replaced it with what was mainly physics. With that being said, you're going to go over simplifying circuits that are in series or in parallel using KVL, KCL, node voltage, and a few others that I didn't really use, because node voltage is amazing. Whenever you do it, use node voltage. You're also going to be going over op amps, though we mainly deal with ideal op amps, which makes it way easier as well, so shout out them. And later in the semester, you're going to be dabbling in alternating current rather than direct current, which is what we primarily used in the beginning of the semester. But with all that being said about how it was no longer a weed out class, it did not take away from the fact that the class was hard. First exam we took, I ended up doing really well, and I don't really know how. But as the year went on, the exams got harder and harder, and I was starting to do worse and worse, because realistically, I choked the final exam. But again, with all that being said, I'm going to rank the class in terms of rigor as an A tier. And now looking at enjoyment, I, for instance, love the class because I like math, and the class was primarily algebra, and just looking at the fact that it was a bunch of puzzles is basically what you were doing. I'm going to rank the class for enjoyment also as an A tier. To recap, for Introduction to Circuits at UT, I'm ranking it as an A tier for rigor and as an A tier for enjoyment. Okay, so now looking at my second class that I took the first semester of college, we're looking at Introduction to Computing, also known as 306. Now this class is less of a weed out class, but that can be also contributed to the fact that I had an amazing professor, Dr. Talang. So if you are taking 306 at UT, get Dr. Talang. Not to bash any of the other professors. I've heard the other professors are also very good, but me personally, Talang was the GOAT. But this class is really interesting as you're going over the basic architecture of what makes computers. You're going over logic gates and transistors and how they make up slightly more complex components within the computer. And though that sounds very complicated, because of the way they teach it in the class, you learn from the very basics and you slowly make your way up. I think it's known as the bottom-up approach, and it's something they preach about at UT Engineering. And it's great because you really do start to understand how computers work. Your questions are answered on how these people go in Minecraft and build these giant contraptions using just redstone, because all they're doing is making a bunch of logic gates. That being said, going into how challenging the class is can be taken in different ways, because I also forgot to mention you code, but it's not one of these higher level programming languages like C or Java or Python. No, you're coding an assembly. All you need to know about assembly is it is very challenging at first, especially when you come from all these other languages that you previously learned that do so much for you. Like, you never realize how much you took for granted in Python or in Java until you're sitting there trying to code a basic algorithm in assembly. But if you do study and you go over all the small details that kind of build up to the greater complexities of the class, I promise you it's not hard, and it's actually very fun. But looking into the challenge of the class, I would rate it at only a B tier. Again, depending on who you ask, they may rate it higher, they may rate it lower. It really depends on what a student is passionate about, because if you're passionate about something, it's typically a lot easier to do. But looking at enjoyment, again, I did enjoy the class and I thought it was super interesting, and that kind of adds to the enjoyment. And it also did help that I had a great professor. So for enjoyment, I'm also going to rank it at A tier with 302. Now hold on, we still have 2 more classes to go, and this next one is going to start off my second semester of freshman year, and that class is going to be 319K, also known as Intro to Embedded Systems. Now this class is unique among the first 4 because not only are you dealing with hardware, which is circuits like we did in 302, but you're also coding, and you're going over assembly and also C, and I love C, and I'm so excited to talk more about that throughout the video. To sum up this class, you're learning how a computer communicates to the world around. We go over digital and analog inputs and outputs. We go over UART and SPI. We go over interrupts much more in depth than we did in 306, which is where we slightly touched on them. And at the beginning of the semester, the final lab, which is creating a video game, seems so hard and this crazy thing that you could never do. And by the end of the class, when you're actually there working on the project, you realize how much you learn throughout the course. And also touching on the video game, if you turn around right here, this is actually a controller I made for the game. We did Pac-Man with a gyroscope. Shout out my partner because he really popped off on the coding. It was very impressive. He created a very interesting physics engine. I did a lot of the hardware and stuff like that. But yeah, that just shows how interesting the class is and how hands-on it is. We had weekly labs. Like one lab showed us how we could use interrupts to create sound, and I think we made like a mini piano. And one lab showed us how to interface an LCD and display pictures and how to refresh it and create new images on the screen. Other labs were just going over other characteristics of a computer and of the board we're using, which is like the MSP something something something. Maybe I'll put a link in the description, or I'll put a link in the comments if people request what board it was. But yeah, going over all that, I will say in terms of rigor, this class had me on my toes. I was very interested in it, yes, but the code was much more difficult because I've never coded in C before, and once we started doing it, it kind of was a punch in the face, and I'm like, wait, I swear we were just doing assembly. And I began to get much more comfortable in assembly, as the previous semester, that's all we did in 306. And then trying to do the code on top of understanding how the hardware is actually working, it just got very confusing very fast. But as I said, it was very enjoyable. The professor was great as well, and all those factors led to me understanding by the end of the semester what was actually going on. But to put a letter on it, I will say in terms of difficulty, it is an S tier. And again, others may rank that differently than I would, and it really just depends on taste. But the class was hard, and the final exam, oh my gosh. I didn't have to do well on the final exam to get a good grade, but when I left that final exam room, I was like scratching my head like, what did I just do? Because it was crazy. So yes, I'm ranking it an S tier in terms of difficulty, but in terms of enjoyment, I'm also gonna rank it an S tier because it was so cool. I mean, we made a video game by the end of it. Like, who would have thought by the end of my freshman year, I knew how to make a game on a microcontroller? So 319, amazing class. Make sure you get a good professor for it, though I'm pretty sure every professor for the course is top tier. So keep that in mind if you are going to UT and you take 319 your freshman year, which I think it's required, so you have to. But yes, that is my ranking for 319K, Introduction to Embedded Systems. Now, going into my fourth and final class that I took freshman year, my second class that I took my second semester, we're looking at 312, Introduction to Software Design. Now, this class is literally just coding. We go over C and C++, and we go over data structures and how memory works and how to allocate memory properly and how not to leak memory. Oh my gosh. Whenever you submit a lab and you have to use Valgrind to make sure you aren't leaking any memory, it is the worst thing in the world. We had labs that were due basically every week or two. It was really, it just depended on the difficulty of the lab. But the labs were difficult and also enjoyable as they taught new concepts in a very interesting way. They were really the most important factor of the class in my opinion. But again, we just went over C and C++, and if you enjoy coding, this class is perfect for you. While I put the rigor at an S tier because oh my gosh, I really struggled with small details in my code and it was horrible. So I'm gonna rank it at an S tier for difficulty. But looking at enjoyment, I'm going to rank it an A tier as well with 302 and 306, which is where I think I put those. I guess I don't really remember. You're going to see on the screen. And the reason I ranked it at an A tier rather than anything lower was that sitting down and just working on a coding lab is peaceful in a way. Until obviously you go to run your code off the grading script and you get errors that you've never seen before. Then yes, it is annoying. But those days when you go to start coding and it just glides and you end up writing all the lines in the span of an hour and then you go to run the grading script and you're chilling, those are great days. And I think those kind of carry the class, and that's why I rank it at an A for enjoyment. But to recap my 4 engineering classes that I took my freshman year of college, I'm going to say for 302, I'm actually changing the ranking because I'm having like flashbacks of how challenging the class was, and it was challenging. I'm ranking the difficulty at an S tier as well. And again, that's going to change for some people, but an S tier for 302, Introduction to Circuits, and for the enjoyment of the class, I'm ranking it at an A tier. For 306, Introduction to Computing, I'm ranking the rigor and the difficulty of the class at an A tier, and I'm rating the enjoyment of the class also at an A tier. Now, for 319K, Introduction to Embedded Systems, I'm ranking the difficulty at an S tier, and I'm ranking the enjoyment of the class as an S tier as well. And finally, for 312, I rated the difficulty of the class at an S tier, and I rated the enjoyment of the class at an A tier. So yes, those are my first 4 engineering classes I took my freshman year. Don't worry. Next year, when I go to rank my classes again, I'll have 4 more actually. And that will be 8 total engineering classes in 2 years, which is crazy. I love that they do that at college. In high school, I took 1 engineering class, and I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and I only got to take 1 engineering class. But I guess if you count the computer science, I took 2 others. But still, it's super exciting when you get to college and you get to take classes that are more designated towards what you want to do in life. But again, if you have any further questions on the courses mentioned, please comment them down below. I'll do my very best to answer. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It's a great way to support the channel, and I'm going to be pumping out more videos as the summer goes on, and hopefully next school year when I'm not in a dorm. But yeah, that's going to be all today. Have a good one, and of course, stay curious.